Delighted to have with us Anna D'Ambrosio from the Polytechnic of Turin. You know that in Turin you have University of Turin and Polytechnic, and now Anna is actually assistant professor of applied economics at the Polytechnic of Turin. I would start by saying that she's a junior scholar. I mean, I say this because, I mean, we had up to now in this web series quite usually senior scholar, but we are happy to have you here, Anna. Anna, just to briefly resume her CV, obtained a PhD in development economics at University of Trento, working on migration flows and local system of production. She then moved, first she had different collaboration experiences still at the University of Trento. Then she moved around at the IAB of Nuremberg in Germany. She also spent some time at the ILO, International Labour Organization, where she worked on a post-disaster needs assessment for the Ecuador earthquake. And Anna, you know that earthquake is quite topical issue at the GSSI. And then she moved back home, say, at the University of Turin before, and then she joined the Polytechnic of Turin, where she is now affiliated. She has worked and still working on different research topics, spanning from the microanalysis of exports and FDIs to that of safety on the workplace. But I would say always having a certain attention to the issues of migration, native versus migrants differences, and also with a certain regional level of analysis. Okay, so I think that the research that Anna has been working fits quite well with the research tracks that we have at the GSSI, and the same holds true for the paper she's going to present today, about which I leave the floor. So Anna, before starting, let me remind to you and to the others the rules of the game. You're going to have a 1 hour's time maximum. I mean, you will no more than 1 hour, let's put it that way. If you finish a bit earlier, we're going to start discussing earlier. Then after that, we have another hour of discussion maximum. And I invite the attendees that want to raise question to just drop me a line in the either DNR or in the chat bottom, okay? I also inform the attendees that the webinar is going to be recorded, which means that someone doesn't want, is invited to leave the Zoom room. We are also broadcasting the webinar on the YouTube channel. So for those who find problematic to get recorded, they can follow the YouTube channel. And then, yeah, the rules of the games I've already mentioned, and I'm not going to steal additional time to Anna. So Anna, welcome, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandro, for inviting me to this seminar. I'm very, very pleased to have the opportunity to be here with you today and to present this paper, which is co-authored with Edoardo Ferrucci and Valentina Meliciani from LUIS and Francesco Quattraro from University of Turin and Collegio Carlo Alberto. The topic of the paper is the relationship between cultural diversity and regional resilience. And we focus on, as you said, as Sandro suggested, a subnational perspective on Italian provinces. Essentially, I would like to mention that the paper is work in progress. This is the first time that I am presenting it in this current form. So I'm very, very happy to receive comments and questions. And so I would like to just restate that you can interrupt me at any time. The underlying motivation for the paper comes, of course, from the fact that economic crises are constituting elements of the business cycle, and that they heavily affect economies. And as we very well know, they have heavily affected, for instance, the country performances and also regional performances. The responses to crisis are, however, quite heterogeneous. And recently, research has started to identify the determinants of the heterogeneous responses to crisis. So broadly speaking, the determinants of the ability of regions to adapt to crisis and to go back to pre-shock conditions, or to find new equilibria, so resilience. Clearly, we are currently experiencing an economic crisis, and we hopefully are able also from this paper to identify something that may be useful for the current situation. So our research question is fairly simple, is whether culturally diverse regions are more resilient. Indeed, we identify a sort of gap in the literature, in the sense that the positive effect of diversity on a variety of aspects of economic performance have been established. For instance, the literature has shown that cultural diversity affects growth, economic growth, affects productivity, exports, wages, employment, and sectoral variety. So we may well expect that cultural diversity has a role for resilience. However, we do not know of any studies that have addressed this issue so far. So we endeavor to address this gap, and we especially provide a few contributions, or at least try to. And of course, I'd like to mention once again that the results I'm going to present you today are absolutely preliminary. In particular, what we do is we build on existing measures of resilience and try to improve the measurement of resilience itself. And using this measure of resilience, we identify a positive relationship between diversity, pre-crisis, measured before the crisis, and resilience. In particular, we show that we are not able to find a positive effect of the cultural diversity as a whole of residents on resilience, but we find that there is a fairly stable and positive relationship between the diversity of entrepreneurs operating in manufacturing and resilience. And finally, we identify, we try to look also at the dynamics of these effects. And it seems that the effects of diversity take some time to materialize. So with this, let's say, anticipation in mind, let me go back quickly to the notion of resilience, which is, of course, as we probably all know in this Zoom room, due to Martin and Stanley and the seminal paper, which is now being really integrated in the analytical tools of economic geography. Initially, the concept was mainly used to identify a system's speed of recovery or ability to return to pre-shock conditions. But then I think it's quite important to recognize also the contribution of the evolutionary economic literature, which effectively realized that the aftershock conditions are, in many cases, especially when we talk about economics, not comparable to the pre-shock conditions. So we should interpret resilience more broadly as the ability of regions to reconfigure their socioeconomic and institutional structures and to develop new growth paths. So as we will see, our proposed measure of resilience takes very much into account this second approach to resilience. We have, of course, a wealth of studies that have studied, that provided definitions, measurements, and empirical identifications of resilience. And we also have prominent studies that show the one representative of which is here with us, more than one actually, that show the remarkable subnational heterogeneity in the ability of regions to react to shocks. So, of course, once we identify the heterogeneity in the resilience capacity across regions, we may be tempted to ask ourselves what are the determinants of such capacity. Indeed, regions are highly differentiated in terms of institutional assets, knowledge bases, economic structures. So we may well expect that these factors that are likely to affect growth, are also likely to affect resilience. Specifically, the literature has identified the role of skills endowment, the role of the composition of the economic structure, and of territorial capital. Territorial capital is a relatively broad notion that captures several components, such as accessibility, such as the availability of collective goods, of private capital, of agglomeration economies, but also of human capital and behavioral modes. All these factors have been shown to affect resilience. And among these factors, I would like to draw your attention to the role of sectoral diversity. Indeed, sectoral diversity, which one may view as related or unrelated sectoral diversity, have been shown in line with the seminal works by Nefke and colleagues to provide a variety of sectors that allow for a better absorption of shocks, and on the other hand, for a variety of knowledge stocks that allow for a better recombination of knowledge and for an easier capacity to go out of a crisis. So indeed, recent studies have shown the relationship between diversity, sectoral diversity in particular, related and unrelated diversification, and resilience. However, we think that this aspect can be further developed. And our own contribution in terms of this current paper also builds on this. Indeed, pretty much as a variety of sectors provides a wealth of knowledge and a variety of sector on which a shock can be absorbed, we think that a variety of cultural origins can similarly promote resilience. Indeed, there is a very large literature that has identified the relationship between diversity and productivity, growth, innovation, entrepreneurship, where the underlying idea is in general that a diversity of cultural origins provides for a more variety, a greater variety in the cognitive perspectives. So it allows for quicker problem solving. It promotes innovation because effectively it bridges knowledge gaps more quickly. So this original finding that comes from the theoretical work by Hong and Page has been shown to apply effectively in a variety of studies with Alesina and colleagues having shown that cultural diversity affects economic growth. Nathan and Kemeny having shown that diversity affects productivity, innovation, and wages. So we really do have a wealth of studies that sharing this common approach that recognizes that a variety of cognitive perspectives promotes innovation and economic growth, have effectively sustained our expectation that diversity can affect economic growth. So pretty much as diversity can affect economic growth, we can expect that it affects resilience. Moreover, in a recent study, we have, and this, sorry, I forgot to mention that these studies have not only shown the positive role of diversity for countries, but also for more refined units of analysis, such as cities and regions. There is, for instance, this very famous paper by Ottaviano and Perry, who was showing the positive effect of diversity on productivity and wages that takes into consideration cities. And also Kemeny has a lot of studies on this. So based on these considerations, and also on a recent work by myself and Alessandra Colombelli and Francesco Quattraro and Valentina Meliciani, we also expect that diversity may affect resilience because it also affects sectoral variety. So broadly speaking, we do expect, our working hypothesis is that cultural diversity will positively contribute to resilience, both directly in the sense that different perspectives will lead to novel solutions within the same sectors or beyond it, and indirectly because it modifies the sectoral composition of the region, as we recently showed. The data that we're going to use for this are coming from the interlinking of different data sets. In particular, the key data come from a data set of the Chamber of Commerce that integrates the information on the location, on the sector of activity of new firms created by foreign-born entrepreneurs. So we are going to draw from this our measure of the diversity of entrepreneurs. Because we know the country of birth of the entrepreneurs. We are going to match this data with information on the province economy that are drawn from the Cambridge Econometrics data set, from Eurostat and from Istat, which allow us to calculate the dependent variable, so our measure of resilience, and all control variables, and in particular the ones relating to the sectoral variety. We have information on Italian provinces between 1980, so we have a pretty long period of observation, and 2015. But we are going to focus, of course, on the post-crisis period. Just to give you a flavor of what our data looks like, on the left-hand side, you have the distribution of the immigration rates in Italy across provinces, and you see that they are pretty much concentrated in the north, and that they follow a remarkable spatial concentration. On the right-hand side, you see the left-hand side data, are drawn from the Istat, official demographic data. On the right-hand side, you have information on the immigrant entrepreneurship rate, which is what we draw from the Chamber of Commerce database. And you see that the distribution is similarly concentrated in the north, but it's not entirely overlapping. So already this may suggest that we are not exactly measuring the same thing when we look at the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs and of residents as a whole. This is indeed confirmed when we compare the cultural diversity of residents and the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs, which you see follow remarkably different patterns. And so with this in mind, we can move on to operationalizing the resilience concept. There are, as I mentioned already, a number of different approaches that one may follow, and we draw in particular very much on Fratesi and Perrucca. The operationalization of resilience requires a variable that signals whether a place has been able to recover to its pre-crisis levels, but also, if we follow the evolutionary economic perspective, also whether it has been able to adapt to the new, to the post-crisis conditions, and to develop new growth paths. We focus our measure of resilience on the manufacturing value added because this allows us to have a clearer grasp of what we mean by resilience. In developments of this work, we are going to extend the measure of resilience to other measurements, for instance, employment or GDP. So the idea is we are going to look for a measure of resilience that tells us the extent to which manufacturing value added is able to go back to the pre-crisis conditions or to change to a new path of development. Drawing on Fratesi and Perrucca, and Capello and Lenzi, we construct the presumed path which value added would have followed in the absence of the crisis by fitting an ARIMA model that exploits the time series before the crisis and forecasting it for the post-crisis period. A problem of this basic framework, which we try to address, is that as we go further away from the crisis period, the forecast becomes necessarily noisier and noisier, and the quality of the forecast, of course, deteriorates. So we address this issue, and we address this issue not only in order to improve the forecasting ability of our model, but also to recognize this idea that the post-crisis situation is not necessarily the same as the pre-crisis. We include in our ARIMA model the level and the growth rate of the nationwide manufacturing value added. So in a way, we are not only projecting what the province-specific manufacturing value added would have been in absence of the crisis, but also what the manufacturing value added trajectory would have been considering the economic conjuncture, the conditions at the nationwide level, okay? So we test the structure of each time series via the Leung-Box method, and essentially we come to measure resilience as the difference between the observed and predicted, not employment, but value added of the region, okay? So the difference between what we predict the trajectory would have been in absence of the crisis and what the trajectory actually is our measure of resilience. So this is what our measure looks like. And so you see that given that our measure takes into consideration the nationwide level and growth rate of value added, the province of Milan, which we take here as an example, would have actually been predicted to perform worse than it did. Of course, if we did not make this adjustment, we would have observed that the province of Milan performed worse than in absence of this correction, okay? So similarly, when we talk about employment, we have something like this. So the resulting measure of resilience, I think, is a fairly interesting measure because it ends up being centered around 0, more or less. So the idea is we are measuring the extent to which a given province is deviating from the predicted path, taking into consideration the fact that there was a crisis around. Okay, so in this sense, the provinces that perform better than predicted can really be considered to be probably developing new growth paths in the sense that Boschma was suggesting. However, of course, as we see from this plot, the majority of provinces perform worse than expected. And of course, this is an effect of the crisis itself. More specifically, if we split our sample between North and South provinces, we see that there is a remarkable distinction between the way that northern provinces and southern provinces performed. And in particular, you see that while, I don't know if you can see it properly, but there is a blue line, horizontal line, which refers to the resilience of northern provinces, which is horizontal on average, while the performance of southern provinces is on average negative. And this is a feature that comes also in many other studies, and which, of course, should warn us that southern provinces in general tend to have worse resilience capacity. When we look at the distribution of resilience geographically, once again, we see that there is a remarkable subnational heterogeneity, even after considering that the majority of southern provinces tend to perform worse. How do we measure our other variables? Well, cultural diversity is measured via an entropy index that is applied to the nationalities of residents and of foreign entrepreneurs. We, of course, include also the immigration rate and the rate of immigrant entrepreneurship. And then we include the sectoral diversity of incumbent firms, measured as the entropy index of firms by sectors of activity, where we measure the unrelated variety at the NACHE 2-digit level. Then we include a set of controls like exports to GDP, imports to GDP, population density, institutional quality, labor productivity, knowledge capital measured as the knowledge capital based on patents, type and the type of knowledge base. So we try, you see that we try to include a variety of controls that allow us to capture the most of the heterogeneity across provinces, so as to be able to cover most of the heterogeneity. Indeed, in practice, institutional quality is a very good predictor of resilience, of our measure of resilience. Population density also turns out to be important. We include labor productivity. So to a large extent, we think that we have captured the heterogeneity across provinces. Moreover, the type of knowledge base is capturing to a large extent the economic structure of the economy. We based our measure on the work by Sedita and colleagues, 2017, on European Planning Studies. And essentially, we measure the knowledge base as a location quotient of firms in sectors classified by the importance of their knowledge base. So that the analytical knowledge base tends to be typical of high and medium-high technological industries and research and development services, while synthetic knowledge base is rather associated with low and medium technological manufacturing industries. So it's sort of capturing the low tech sectors, okay? And symbolic knowledge base instead is mainly comprising creative industries. So
Anna, sorry,
yeah.
can I ask you something?
Yes.
So I've got the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs, where basically you focus on foreign entrepreneurs, right? Yep. But for the cultural diversity of the residents, do you have Italians among the residents or not?
No, we follow Alesina and the colleagues, Alesina et al. 2016, and we essentially distinguish the size of diversity from the diversity, the distribution of diversity, the size component from the distribution component of diversity, because indeed, clearly the as Lesina et al. Showed, the diversity as a whole, including Italians, can be decomposed into roughly the share of foreigners in the region, in the province in this case, and the distribution based on a Herfindahl index of origin countries. Okay, and this is a more accurate measure of diversity than keeping them together, of course. We use an entropy index instead of a fractionalization index as Alesina and La Ferrara do, Alesina, sorry, et al. Do. But the intuition is the same, because there is no conceptual difference between the fractionalization index and the entropy index from this perspective. So to answer your question, we include separately the cultural diversity of residents and the immigration rate, essentially, as well as we include separately the cultural diversity of the entrepreneurs and the immigrant entrepreneurs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is also due to the fact that the cultural diversity is per se greater, the greater the share of immigrants in the country, technically. So for this reason, we keep the two separate. Now, to measure the relationship between cultural diversity and resilience, I would like to draw your attention to our relationship to our reasoning, because here I think we reached a point of agreement, but the reasoning is not so obvious. So indeed, ex ante, first of all, we are not sure that, for instance, more culturally diverse regions are more resilient. We are not sure that, for instance, provinces like Milan or Turin, or which are remarkably more diverse, but also more performing from the economic point of view, are also more resilient, right? So, and given that the considerations that we made earlier with respect to the fact that different perspectives should, according to arguments that have been made in the literature, should allow for a variety of ideas that can be grasped and that can be used to overcome the crisis. Okay, we think that we are more interested in the between variation across provinces than in the within variation across provinces. In particular, we are interested in whether more diversity affects resilience, rather than if an increase in diversity affects resilience. And I would like you possibly to give me some feedback on this, because we think that it is really the level of diversity that matters to the ability of a province to be resilient, rather than an increase in the diversity.
You mean relative versus the absolute diversity?
I mean the level versus the growth rate, for instance. Okay. From this point of view, this of course bears implications for the estimation strategy, because if we were interested in an increase in diversity as having effects on resilience, we would go for a fixed effect model or something like this. But rather, we think we are more interested in the effect of levels of diversity in terms of their ability to promote resilience. So from this point of view, we thought that the most appropriate empirical strategy is to resort to a sort of moonluck kind of model. In particular, we use a hybrid model, which is almost the same, which allows us to separate the within from the between variation in the covariates, and to include also time invariant pre-crisis factors, including diversity. Indeed, of course, if you think about it, the diversity, the post-crisis diversity changes in diversity are highly likely to be endogenous, right? So if diversity changes, this is most likely because the composition of the immigrant population and the immigrant entrepreneurs population changes. So this is most likely to be a reaction to the conditions prevailing in the region. So most likely regions that turn out to be more resilient are going to drive changes in the diversity, in the composition of the immigrant population. So
sorry, I have a question, if possible, short question. I didn't get why you've used the Mundrak adjustment basically to simulate fixed effect. This is just the main reason to use it usually. But I mean, would have been different if you, in this case, use simple fixed effect and then estimate the parameter for this fixed effect? I mean, does it change?
The main point is that, as I was trying to argument, we are not interested in the change, okay, in diversity, in the effect of changes in diversity on resilience, but we're interested in the effect of the level of diversity on resilience. The level of diversity, we want to measure it before the crisis, because we think it is a more appropriate measure of the ability of the region to produce a variety of cognitive approaches that may then be helpful for reacting to the crisis. Using a Mundrak model, we essentially can include the level of diversity before the crisis among the regressors and estimate its effect directly. Okay.
But this is in any case, this is a time invariant component, no?
Exactly.
So I mean, if you estimate a model with Mundrak means or with fixed effect, it should be the same, no?
Yes, but we cannot.
Just provide a quick reply, because we don't lose the narrative. So we might return on this point, Alessandro, if you don't mind, later on the discussion, right? So let us.
Yeah, okay.
Let us.
Because it was a technical.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I wouldn't really like if we, disperse the audience on this point without having the full story. So we can go back on this later on, okay?
But I mean, it's an important point. In the sense that we are interested in including a factor that is time invariant. But of course, we want to keep an eye on the heterogeneity across provinces. So to do so, we employ a hybrid model, which allows us to include diversity as, maybe I didn't say this clearly enough, the diversity before the crisis. Okay, the average level of diversity measured between 2002 and 2007, before the crisis, which is this div I, okay, jointly with a number of other factors that are, some of them are time varying, some of them are fixed, time variant, okay? In this way, of course, we produce similar estimates for the within component when we look at the differences between the observed values and their means, we get a measure of the between component. I don't know if you can see my my pointer here. We get a measure of the between effects of, and we capture the between component of variation from the averages. Okay. So with some approximation according to previous studies like Baltagian, Griffin, Pirotten, and Pfeffermeyer, with this is equivalent to separate the long-run effects from the short-run effects of the covariates. Okay, so for instance, we can measure the long-run effect of related variety from the short-run effect of a change in related variety. Okay, and more importantly, as I mentioned, this allows us to measure the effect of diversity per se, measured before the crisis. Okay, so in a way, we take stock of studies in the economic history approaches. Okay, so a quick look at our, as I mentioned, very preliminary results. Of course, the full set of regressors is the one I mentioned earlier. Okay, what I would like to draw your attention to is the important role of population density for diversity, the important effects of institutional quality that emerge from our model, the dummy for North that emerges as very relevant. And as you see, the cultural diversity of the residents before the crisis has a positive coefficient, but is not estimated to be significant. Similarly, the immigration rate does not turn out to be significant. Instead, the cultural diversity of the entrepreneurs operating in the manufacturing sector, measured as the mean diversity between 2002 and 2007, has a positive effect of on diversity, on resilience, which is also significant. The immigrant entrepreneurship rate is also positive, but not significant. Okay, in the column 5, we correct the disturbances to take into consideration the autocorrelation between errors, and the estimated autocorrelation coefficient is 0.73. So what I think that we should now focus on is probably to take more into account the dynamic component of our model. We also take advantage of our approach to estimate the interaction effects between diversity and different time periods. And what, so we interact our diversity measure with a time dummy. And what seems to be emerging is that the effect of diversity takes some time to materialize. So in 2008, we do not see a positive effect of diversity that is significant, nor in 2009, but starting from 2010, this seems to be the case. Okay, so it seems to be that the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs takes a couple of years to materialize, and then it becomes consistently positive and significant. We also estimate our model using deep legs. Given that we have at our availability some years of observation, we can, of course, lag all our variables some years. We experiment with 5 years and 7 years. 7 years, of course, is the period that allows all the crisis, post-crisis observations to have a pre-crisis regressor, okay? And you see that consistently with the pattern that we described before, the effects remain strongly positive and significant. And also we, in this, with this specification, we see that there is a significant effect of the immigrant entrepreneurship rate, okay? The role of population density and institutional quality is also confirmed, and the role of northern regions also remains confirmed. Okay, so I can come to the conclusions. and mentioned that essentially we identify a gap in the understanding of the relationship between cultural diversity and resilience. We identify some previous findings, preliminary findings that show a relationship between diversity and resilience, but which holds exclusively if we focus on the cultural diversity of the entrepreneurs in the manufacturing sector. There seems to be some dynamic in this effect, and we are now going to go deeper into the analysis of these dynamics. I can tell you that we experimented with leg-dependent variables, which of course are not recommended with neither with random effects, but there seems to be really some issue there. So we need to study the dynamic role and the dynamic side of this story. And also we need to address the spatial dimension as well. So for the moment, I think I can stop here, and I'm very happy to get your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Indeed, it was an interesting piece of job. You said this is preliminary, but I think that you already done some interesting piece of work, and now we can open the floor to discussion. I think that also Alessandro, now if you want, you can return back on your issue, but we can collect also other questions from the floor. I might have also a question too, but before I would like to see whether that someone wants to intervene. Should I look at, yeah, so there's Alessandra actually who wrote in the chat. So Alessandra, please.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was a very interesting presentation. So I have some random thought, a couple of, one question and maybe a couple of thoughts. I think that your most interesting results is what you pointed out at the end. So not so much that cultural diversity matters, but that cultural diversity of the residents doesn't, and cultural diversity of entrepreneurs does. And I know you're doing some more work, so I was wondering, so entrepreneurs are a selected group of the population, right? So I was wondering if you remember, or if you will go back and look at that, what's the range of values for the cultural diversity of residents versus the one of entrepreneurs? Which one is higher, on average among provinces? Do you have like a variance which is larger for one of the two compared to the others? Because I think that now the most interesting thing is to compare the two groups and find out what are their differences, because basically what you are saying is that it's a difference between the two groups that counts. One is insignificant and the other one is significant.
Yeah, in terms of their summary statistics, the diversity of the entrepreneurs and the diversity of the residents are quite similar. Mm-hmm. So it really seems to be more a matter of the composition rather than of their distributions.
And spatial distribution, because you show that the two maps are really different. I remember that. On that, okay, so this is like the one of the stupid questions that I know normally gets the presenter infuriated, because it's always about the control variable that you didn't put in. Yeah. Of course, I mean, there are a lot of things that come to mind, factors that are not in the bottle. I'm not worried about 99% of them, but I was just wondering why you decided to put density of population in, but not size. And I'm asking you, I'm telling you why. So in the paper you mentioned, one of the things that came out quite clearly, although we didn't have provinces, but local labor market, was that the medium-sized one were actually the most resilient. So going back to the idea of Milan, right? It was bouncing back quite well after the crisis, but during the crisis it did go down, so it didn't have a lot of resistance. So it was in this hybrid group, not the group of the, say, top most resilient places. And so we found that size matters. So I was just wondering why you didn't put that inside. I'm just finishing and telling you all my thing together, and then you can answer. Immigration, is it international or is it interregional? Is it both?
International.
International, okay. And then I also found, this is more of a comment rather than a question, I also found very interesting the variation that you find post 2009, right? That graph where you could see that you had more variance, because basically this is telling you what everybody's saying even right now for COVID, that inequality increases after a crisis, because it really shows that there are losers and winners in a sense. So that, I think that graph stuck to my mind, because I think it's pretty much what also, you know, we find when we look at this phenomenon. Okay, so just the one on size then. Thank you. Very interesting anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, for these very, very interesting comments. In relation to population, we chose to include the population density because we were more worried that we were capturing, you know, we wanted to be capturing the heterogeneity to avoid that our results are driven by highly urbanized areas. But we definitely could also experiment with population size.
You could put both of them inside, because density is more, as you say, agglomeration, but size tells you a little bit more, and especially when you're looking at cultural diversity, somehow I think that size does matter. But anyway, just a thought, you know, I don't know, I don't even know whether by putting it inside the results will change or not. So,
but that's a great suggestion. Thank you for this. And actually, I would like also to mention that it's important to include density because it correlates highly with migration. So, and this is also motivating the inclusion of a number of other regressors, because we really want to purge the effect of diversity from possible confounding factors.
Sorry, if I may, just very quickly, because I had another thing on my mind. Sandra, I promise this is very quickly. So in the paper of 2018, we had, as you find, basically strong regional negative fixed effect in the south. So these regions, these local labor markets were doing worse than what we expected with the model. But then I had this very strong effect of Rome, and I thought it was because of public employment, but we didn't have it in the model. By looking at your maps and whatever, I kind of had the same feeling that the public employment was one of these variables that might tell you something. You didn't have that either, right?
No, but yeah, you're right. We could look for.
Because Rome, I assume, was very high in your resilience index.
Yeah.
Or not? Yeah.
There
is a Rome effect, yeah.
There is a Rome effect, and indeed, you're right. We could definitely look at whether we have a measure of the public sector employment. You're right. Let me mention that we measure GVA, so gross value added, in manufacturing. So this is not necessarily driven by the role of a public sector, but of course this drives the role of the public sector drives demand, for instance. So this may be correlating with it. So yeah, so we will have a look at this. Thank you for the suggestion.
You want to add more, Anna?
No, I would like to thank Alessandra, because indeed what the intuition that she asked about the distribution of the two is something that struck us as well, and this was among the first things that we checked, and it's really impressive that the distribution of diversity of entrepreneurs and of residents from the purely distributional point of view is very similar. What is really different is where each of them is located. So this geographic special dimension seems to be more important. So thank you very much.
All right, so Alessandro, if you want to keep on with your question, please do it now.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for your interesting presentation. And no, just to be sure that I correctly understood, the idea of using the MUNDAC was to basically capture long-run differences, to use that as a baseline level control. Is that right? Okay, so down, okay. And, no, go ahead.
No, I was asking whether you think this is a fair approach to study the issue, because we really felt that a year-by-year analysis would not capture what we're really interested in. We're more interested in, fixing diversity to the pre-crisis period to see whether it had some, let's say, longer run effects. And this actually seems to be the case.
Mm-hmm. No, I perfectly got it now. Okay. Okay, let me ask you just very shortly, but just because I'm curious. Basically, you use time series analysis. I completely ignorant about that, so provided that to basically make a kind of counterfactual of your based on the level of resilience, no? But what about using a synthetic control method or something based on that?
Synthetic control method, you would use other provinces to estimate what. Yeah, this is an interesting suggestion. So
yeah, just to make a synthetic region, given that you have a very long time series, and usually synthetic control needs long time series. And the framework, I think, is basically the same. So basically, you need a counterfactual.
Yeah.
Or maybe it might be useful.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it might be useful just to reframe the analysis in another setting that can be more causal oriented than just for that. But I want to be clear on that. I'm completely ignorant about your methodology. So maybe the methodology you use is even better. So
the approach that we follow is essentially to forecast based on the trends that we observe in the value added in this case. What you're suggesting is to forecast effectively not only based on the province-specific trends of value added, but for instance, taking into consideration the trends of other provinces, of other similar provinces.
To be sure, I'm not sure that this is the case because synthetic control is can be fruitfully used when you have just 1-2 set of province and a lot of other province that where the treatment is not applied. I don't know if this is the case. Maybe you can investigate, but in any case, the idea is just to wait to make a synthetic region by waiting on different regional characteristics. So that's the idea, which is basically your idea instead of predicting the effect.
Yeah, that may be interesting. I think it goes in the same direction, I mean, conceptually, of trying to take into consideration the changing nature of the economic conjuncture, in the sense that if we, this is behind why we included the national growth rate and the national level of gross value added in our measure. And I think we end up with something similar if we build a synthetic control based on other provinces, right? Because you're right that I'm not sure, and I would have to give some thought on the idea of I mean, for each province, building a synthetic control that is based on the other provinces, and I'm not sure whether this is fine.
No, because you should identify just a specific set of provinces that are hit by some kind of crisis or, I don't know, it was just, I was curious about
it's a nice idea. We could give some thought to this, actually. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And on this respect, I would like also to add that I think what could add to our study, and of course, when we have, established our results more, is to also try and distinguish whether the effect of diversity and resilience is in terms of promoting really the start of a new growth path, or rather to prevent, dramatic falls or dramatic decreases. So is it a factor that promotes resilience in the sense of, how do you say, of magnifying, of promoting a new path, a new positive path that is more positive than predicted, or is it more in terms of protecting the region from negative shocks? I think this is an aspect that we should investigate more.
Oh, no, but it's very interesting, this methodology. So I've never seen applied to this case. So
this builds very much on Fratesi and Peruca, with just this, which in turn build on Capello and Lenzi, but and we just adapted by including them.
okay, okay. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Alessandro.
Hey, any other question from the floor? I do have a couple of questions. The interesting thing of the paper, Anna, is that it touches upon two cakes of a house. You know that, I mean, we deal with both resilience and culture of the GSSI, and although resilience to natural disaster may be so different kind of resilience, but still very close to the topics of your paper. And I've got two questions on each of those two topics. About cultural diversity and cultural variety. I'm not a cultural guy. I mean, there's Alessandro Crociata and other might be more expert than me on the topic, but I don't know. I was somehow not really disappointed, but yeah, sort of disappointed to see that basically what you have as a proxy of the cultural diversity or variety is to be sure an ethnical kind of variety. I mean, what you do have there is basically foreigners that have different nationalities, and that's it. And you take this to account for a possibly richer kind of idea, which is that of cultural variety and diversity. I'm wondering whether in the empirical literature this is a standard proxy, or whether some studies have tried to provide a more accurate proxy of cultural diversity, which in my possible intuition, I'm not really an expert on that, tells much more than a simple ethnical variety or ethnical diversity. This is my first concern. The second point is very much related to what Alessandra said. But in my view, what you have there is the simple cultural variety and that expressed by the residents and that expressed by entrepreneurs, to me, are quite two different things. And if I go back to a story that you try to argue in supporting your research hypothesis, I think that it mainly fits with the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs, because you refer to problem solving, you refer to diversity of ideas, diversity, cognitive proximity, and so on and so forth. And in my view, the kind of variable that is more telling of this is exactly that of referring to foreign entrepreneurs. So I'm not surprised at all finding that you don't have any significance on the other. And I'm wondering whether the other might be simply treated as a control, or if you can actually build up a story also on that variable. So summing up, I'm wondering whether your focal variable is just one rather than two on which you can build up your story.
Yeah.
Then another comment is about the way you measure resilience. As far as understood, I'm also completely ignorant, but I'm seeing that you made an effort in getting sort of an original measurement of resilience, right? And stupid question is whether you're going to have different results using a standard measurement. So does this kind of measurement actually show that you capture something different from using a standard, normal way of measuring resilience? Is there something new or different?
Yeah. Okay, I'll start from this last question.
Sorry. And that's the very, very last question, which has to do with the fact that I'm afraid that I got lost with how the story of the direct and indirect effects of variety and resilience get reflected in the results.
Okay.
I might got lost if you just help me in connecting the results on the direct versus indirect effects of variety on resilience.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much for these questions. They're also very, very interesting. In terms, I'll start from the last because I have a very bad memory. The story between direct and indirect effect refers to, which probably was too quick on, refers to the relationship between the diversity, cultural diversity of entrepreneurs, which we identified in a previous paper, on sectoral variety. Sectoral variety is per se a predictor of resilience. And in this sense, because cultural diversity we found relates with sectoral variety, and this affects resilience, this is what we refer to in terms of an indirect effect. Okay, so the direct effect would be the one that is usually argumented in terms of diversity of ideas, problem solving, and so on. The indirect effect would be in terms of cultural diversity, promoting not only actually sectoral diversity, but also promoting innovation, promoting productivity, and so on, which can, build the capacity of the system to be resilient. In terms of the alternative measures of resilience, we do find we are not entirely aligned with previous measures of resilience when we use our measure. Yeah, so this is definitely something on which I think we should build on, because of course, on the one hand, it may be that we are measuring something that is more closely in line with what with our idea of resilience, but also it of course must compare to previous studies. And I must say that the main results of the paper are remarkably stable when we include a lag-dependent variable. So no matter which dependent variable you use based on our calculation or other calculations, the results are very similar. If we omit the lag-dependent variable, the results are not always entirely similar. So we have to further dig into this issue to understand exactly what is behind this. And I think you're right. We need to understand this better in order to sell our measure of diversity, right? For instance, of course, if you would, just because I have the graph here, if you would draw the same graph for the standard Verruca and Pratesi measure, Pratesi and Verruca, sorry, measure of resilience, you would see that there is a straight line here. Okay, so essentially they do not take into account the fact that overall, right, the economic conjuncture has worsened. So there is no way that the system possibly goes back to the original condition, right? So, for instance, the resilience that they would measure would be smaller than the one that we measure. Okay, so we probably have to further argument on this. We are fairly convinced that the approach is correct. And I personally think it's very important that we have an average of 0, which really allows us to capture the heterogeneity in the resilience capacity, which is not the case if you use the measure by Verruca and Pratesi. Sorry. Okay, so I'm fairly convinced of this measure, but of course we need to work more on comparing the measures. Regarding diversity, you are right. The measure of diversity of entrepreneurs, I think it's true that we actually have mainly one explanatory variable in mind, which is the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs, which is also, I mean, I'm quite confident about the results, because this is also what we find in this previous study that studies the relationship between diversity and sectoral variety. So, and there as well, we find that the effect goes mainly through the variety of entrepreneurs. I am also not surprised that the effect goes through them because they are the ones who are probably more able to enact the problem-solving capacity that we talked about. But on the other hand, it may be that purely theoretically, the cultural diversity of entrepreneurs is, of the residents, is in general providing ideas that can be exploited in different ways and in a way captured differently. Essentially, more cultural variety may provide more ideas and more ability per se, even if it's not embedded within entrepreneurs. From the point of view of what is usually done, the key reference there is Alesina et al. 2016, Journal of Economic Growth, and they suggest to use birthplace diversity. Birthplace diversity is, according to them, the best proxy for cultural diversity. And because they say it more accurately captures the difference in acculturation, the difference in the educational systems, the difference in culture that people have experienced, more accurately than for instance, nationality diversity or racial diversity in the US setting, for instance. I buy this story, but I must say that in the Italian case, there is not much difference between nationality and birthplace diversity. So effectively, what we can do, the only thing that we can do in terms of capturing the diversity of the residents is using their nationalities, because this is the only information that is available from the ISTAT. But I think about 90% of the working age population that is foreign, that has a foreign citizenship, is also foreign born. So it's really almost the same thing.
All right. Okay. We have a... No, do you want to add more? Sorry, did I interrupt you? No.
No.
Okay. So I think that by referring to culture, I've woken up Alessandro Crociata interest in the issue. So there's a question from Alessandro Crociata, and then also another question from Ugo. Alessandro, please go ahead.
Thank you, Sandro. Thank you, Anna, for your nice presentation.
Thank you.
Really interesting. Well, my concern is more or less on how you measure cultural diversity. Yes, Sandro already put such question, but my question is, by moving from the theoretical approach you quoted in the introduction of your presentation, and so that cultural diversity could be conducive to a problem-solving mindset, and so on, could be reasonable to measure cultural diversity of the workforce employed in firms? Because yes, we can assume that the problem-solving mindset is a sort of individual set of skills, and so cultural diversity measured in terms of cultural diversity in the workforce could be interesting to an interesting issue to develop. This is my main concern. Second question is, you talk about you measure the entropy with the entropy cultural diversity, but you use a generalized entropy index or the inverse of Erfindal index. And the third one is, in your opinion, of course, could be reasonable to use as control variables the share of foreign citizens in the region. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for these comments. We do use the share of foreign citizens in the region. Okay, I forgot to write it in the slide, but it's there. And we also include the share of foreign entrepreneurs in the region. Exactly because of what I mentioned earlier in terms of capturing the size versus the diversity. Okay. And it looks like it's the diversity. So it's the distribution of cultures rather than the size per se that matters. which I think is somehow interesting and somehow supporting the initial arguments. We use, our measure of diversity is an entropy index, but we, not in this paper, in another paper, we have shown that the results are very similar. I mean, of course, not in terms of resilience, because this is the only paper on diversity and resilience that we have. But when using diversity measured as an Erfindal index or 1 minus Erfindal, or as an entropy index, the results are remarkably similar. In essence, they both use the shares of each nationality on total, so they just combine them slightly differently. So, but I think we could definitely provide a robustness check with the entropy, I mean the fractionalization index or Herfindahl index, call it as you like. In terms of the measurement of the cultural diversity of the workforce, we actually thought about this, but we unfortunately do not have the data for that. The cultural diversity of the workforce, as far as I know, could only be taken from the labor force survey, but the labor force survey information on foreign citizens is only reliable at the NUTS1 level. So this is definitely too much compared with what we need for the province level analysis. So I definitely agree it would be very much in line with our approach, and also a natural extension of this of these results to look at diversity in the workforce, but unfortunately we do not have the data for that. So if you have suggestions on data sources on which to base this analysis, I would be very happy to hear it, because I definitely agree that it would be interesting. So yeah. And the final point, I think I personally had a paper on the extent to which cultural diversity can really be considered to be an accurate measure of the cognitive diversity that is behind, because this is somehow, you know, assuming that if you are, you know, from Ecuador, for instance, and you're from Italy, there are two different mindsets. But of course, this may be different in a culture, in a multicultural society, right? So I think it's a simplification. It's a necessary simplification, but as far as I know, this is the one that is prevailing in the literature. Thank you for
that. All right. Thank you, Anna. Then Ugo, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Anna, for your very interesting seminar. I have one question. Are you interested in your analysis in distinguishing between urban or highly urbanized areas and lowly urbanized areas, between big cities and small cities, in terms of cultural diversity, and how this impacts on regional economies and regional resilience? Because also the cultural diversity you find in big cities is probably different from the one you find in small cities, or perhaps are hard to compare such different geographical entities. And if you are aware of the theory, the very successful theory in the last 2 decades of Richard Florida, who linked the economic dynamism, the economic competitiveness of big cities, or some cities, to the fact that there was diversity in terms of, he referred to ethnic diversity, sexual diversity, and also cultural diversity. So, so I'm interested in understanding if you're kind of unpacking this regional dimension, looking at the specific role of cities, and or in different sizes and different dimensions. Thanks.
Thank you. I think this is a great suggestion, actually. We haven't looked at this yet, but also building on Alessandra's comment, I think we need to try and unpack the results and try to distinguish, for instance, the highly densely populated area from the low less densely populated areas, the the provinces, of course, because this is the unit of analysis, but the provinces hosting major cities from those hosting less cities, less sizable cities. This may be interesting, but my feeling is that actually there is more that comes from the side of the institutional quality. This is really the key driver that I have seen in terms of the driver of resilience, which I was somehow surprised not to see so much in the literature. But this is, on the one hand, almost a perfect predictor of the north-south or the region. I mean, when you experiment with NUTS2 fixed effects and population, and institutional quality, this is almost this increases multicollinearity dramatically, because this is almost the same thing. So I think it's interesting to try and identify patterns indeed. And indeed, in these terms, the previous literature is, in building taxonomies, in trying to classify the provinces or local labor markets according to characteristics. This is something interesting to do. And we could try to study some of the heterogeneity in the effects. Yeah, thanks for the suggestion.
All right. Do we have additional questions from the floor? No other question? No.
Andro, ho una domanda io.
Fabiano, please go ahead.
Anna, thanks for your presentation. I was listening to you now about the institutional issue. And okay, I think that it's very important, and the institutional issue maybe is affected by human capital. Mm-hmm. In fact, human capital is also very important in order to understand if diversity, heterogeneity is rejected or otherwise is integrated into cities, provinces, and so on. So yes, maybe also I'm going to say a further exploration about the human capital could provide some information. And I had another question about the role of the different knowledge sources provided by Hashem. I didn't get the relationship between those different sources and the effect on diversity.
Yeah, thanks very much. I didn't get it because I didn't mention it. But the point is that in general, the immigration share correlates highly with the share of manufacturing activity or share of manufacturing in general in a certain region. So if a region is marked importantly by, for instance, high-tech or low-tech manufacturing, and we do not control for that, we may attribute to diversity, which comes from, of course, immigration, an effect that is actually from the sectoral composition of the region. So this is why we put some emphasis on the type of knowledge base, which is, by the way, a proxy of the sectoral composition of the region. So we include it mainly to control for this correlation. But I didn't mention that what we find is a positive effect of the analytic knowledge base, which is the one, let's say, that marks the high-tech sectors on resilience. And instead we find a negative effect of the other specializations. So it looks like regions that were specialized in, say, high-tech manufacturing sectors before the crisis tended to be more resilient to the crisis. Instead, the regions that were specialized in less high-tech manufacturing sectors and in the so-called symbolic knowledge base, so in, let's say, the creative industries, tended to suffer more from the crisis. This is what is behind the inclusion of that variable. So mainly it is to control for the spurious correlation between diversity and resilience that may go through sectoral composition. In terms of human capital, I didn't include it in the set of regressors that I mentioned because after controlling for institutional quality, for population density, for all the factors that we include, this turns out insignificant. So we removed it from the model, but we have experimented including that variable as well. The problem is that after all these variables are highly correlated with each other. So it's difficult to, especially once you include institutional quality, you effectively have captured everything essentially. Yeah, we have experimented including it, and the results were unaffected. And I like very much the idea that you suggested that provinces marked with higher human capital may be better able to integrate foreigners, so they may grasp the benefits from diversity better, which is actually a result from, for instance, Kemeny, that provinces or regions or cities, I don't remember now, that are more inclusive tend to benefit from diversity more. And so we may think of studying whether there is this moderating effect, which is absolutely reasonable actually. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, and in fact, thank you. I was wondering if there is a piece of literature exploring the different attitude present at the local level and this capacity to I'm going to say, to benefit from the diversity, or on the contrary, to create a lock-in situation with different social groups, I'm going to say, excluding each other and fighting and creating a sort of local impasse. Mm-hmm. But I don't know this kind of literature, so it's a very maybe a stupid question, but
no, it's absolutely an excellent question in the sense that the literature has highlighted that there is this moderating effect of inclusive institutions. In the case of Kemeny, we in the study I mentioned about the relationship between diversity and sectoral variety, we also employ a measure of the integration index calculated by the CNEL. It's not yearly, but at least until some time ago, it was provided almost yearly. So you have a measure of the extent to which provinces are inclusive towards foreigners. We see that this moderates positively the effect of diversity. So we definitely could expect that this occurs also in the case of resilience. And I mean, yeah, that more open, in a way, if you want to make it very simple, more open regions are better able to grasp the benefits from diversity. This is something that is fairly well grounded in the literature, and I think it could apply here as well. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
All right. Any other question from the floor? By the way, I just noticed that there were both the co-authors of yours among the attendees. I've seen that Francesco then has left because he has to go, but I also seen that, I don't know whether Valentina is still there or not, but we are pleased that she has been here. I don't know whether if she wants to add something, of course, she's more than welcome. But I mean, if there are no other questions from the floor, I think that we can actually end up the webinar now. Okay, so Anna, again, once more, thank you very much for having accepted our invitation, for having presented your paper here. It has been very much interesting. If you want, we can insert you in our mailing list for the next webinars. We still have a quite interesting bunch of papers and presentations to come, starting from next Wednesday, where we have Trevon Barnes and then other very good presenters. So if you wish, we can put it in the mailing list, and you can be advice of next events. Valentina also said, thanks, Sandra Partisa. Thanks to you, Valentina. Yeah, and that's it. Okay, so I wish to everybody and to you a good afternoon, and stay safe, which in this time is also the most important thing. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks everyone for the excellent questions and comments.
Yeah, thank you to you, Anna. Bye, everybody. Ciao.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao,
Thank
ciao.
you, Anna. Bye.
Oh, there's also Eduardo Ferrucci. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Bye bye. Ciao. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, bye bye.